So question 2 will always be worth 10 marks, and you're about 13 to 15 minutes on it, and you've got about 5 to 10 quotes. So another example would be, you read the extract and it says, how does the writer make it tense and dramatic? So why do we want a lot of quotes? Well, basically we want a lot of quotes because they get you marks. So again, these two students, they gave the same sort of answer. Really good answers. However, the person on the left had not got into their head that they needed to do quotes. So they only did 2 quotes, and because of that, they only got about 2 out of 10. But the person on the right got into their head, I need to put quotes in loads of times, even if I don't have to explain every quote. Remember, if the quote is really simple, you don't have to explain it. So these two people are very similar standard, but because the one on the right's got a better exam technique, they knew how to do quotes, they will get a lot higher marks. Okay, so the how question, explain why you picked the quote and why the writer has used those words for an effect. And do as many as you can in 13 minutes. Remember, I've said to you try to do 5 to 8 quotes, but it's just about the time. If after 13 minutes you've done 1 quote, you move on to the next question. If after 13 minutes you've done 8 quotes, it doesn't matter. You move on to the exact end of the question, end of the exam. You've got to finish the exam. So this question is all about zooming in on keywords and thinking why has the writer used them. So if we look at this example, this is an extract about a young boy. This is a real exam question. A young teenager, he broke the world record because he sailed around the world on his own. So the question would be, how does the writer show Mike's trip was tough? That is the question. Okay, so this is the article. It's available on Teams if you want to get it. So this is the extract. So what I would do is I would read this extract, and with my highlighter, I would highlight 7 or 10 quotes that make his trip or voyage sound tough or difficult. Remember, if you don't know a word, so for example, in the second paragraph here, it says grueling. If you don't know what grueling means, leave it. Don't guess. There will be enough in the article for you to talk about. Okay, so for this question, to get a grade 5 or above, you would get a quote and say why it makes the trip sound difficult. You would do 1 or 2 sentences per quote, and you would do no waffle along PEs. Remember, we want you to talk about 7 or 8 points in little detail as opposed to 2 huge PEs about 2 quotes. Remember, it doesn't matter how good your explanation is. If you only do 2 quotes, you're going to be lucky to get more than 2 out of 10. So for example, if it said in the extract, it's not in this one, but I've actually made this one up. If it said Mike had huge blisters on his hands from day one. So remember, if he's sailing around the world, because of the ropes and stuff, his hands are like that from day one, okay? If the question was, how does the writer show Mike's trip was tough, and he had huge blisters on his day, why is that tough? Well, I would put, the writer makes the voyage seem tough by describing Mike having huge blisters on his hands from day one. This tells the reader he was in pain all the way through the trip. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? If you had huge blisters on your hands, you are going to be in pain. That is why it makes the trip sound tough. My little starting sentence here, the writer makes the voyage seem tough by describing Mike, I would do that sentence just as my little introduction. After that, for my next 5 or 6 quotes, don't bother writing, the writer makes the voyage seem tough. You're just going to waste time. After doing it the first time, just give me a quote and say why it makes his trip sound tough. Okay, another one. If it said Mike did the trip solo, so solo means as in on his own, why does that make Mike's trip sound tough? Well, okay, so it basically seems tough because he did the whole trip alone and with no help from others. So you could talk about that it was hard to do because he would have to do all the sailing on his own, or you could do it from a point of view where he might get lonely. But obviously, if he had a whole team of 20 people helping him, it's going to be a lot easier. But the fact he did everything on his own makes it tough. Okay, another one. If it said Mike experienced monstrous storms, how does that make it seem tough? It could have put Mike experienced storms. It could have put Mike experienced big storms. But why have they used that word, that adjective monstrous? What does the writer want us to think when it says monstrous? Well, if you think about monstrous, what do you think of? You think of a monster. You think of something that's scary. You think of something that's tough. You think that is something that's powerful. So I put monstrous makes it sound like the weather was scary, big and powerful, because that's what the word monstrous means to me. Notice in this PE it's 1 sentence. I've not started it by going, another way that Mike found the trip tough is, I've just given my quote and said why it makes it sound tough. Okay, another one, same again. This time is, I'm going to just give you a few in a row. It does get very lonely. Okay, I've put this makes it seem tough as Mike has no one to talk to. Okay, so I'd get a mark for that. But remember, if it's a really obvious quote, don't bother explaining it. So for example, this example, I would get a mark for just going, another way it seems tough is that Mike got very lonely and I would just put very lonely in my quotation marks, and that would be enough to get a mark. So remember, if it's really obvious, don't explain the quote. He battled 50-foot waves. Okay, they've told us the size of the waves. Okay, to show the reader the waves absolutely huge. They could have said Mike had to deal with 50-foot waves. They've put battled. What do they want us to make us think? Well, a battle is a war. It's a fight. So I put this suggests the waves are gigantic and Mike had to fight against them. And the boat went berserk. Again, they could have said the boat was hard to control. They've put berserk, which means erratic, crazy, uncontrollable. And that's why they've put that in that sentence. So this is tough, as it makes the boat sound tough and predictable. Okay, remember, if you're running out of time on a 10-mark question, forget about the PEs and just pick out quotes. So that one about lonely, if I've got time, I might want to put, Mike says he's lonely on the trip. This makes it seem tough, as Mike has no one to talk to when he's feeling low. But if I'm running out of time, just put another way it seems tough is when Mike says he's lonely. So I'm ignoring this bit. I'm not doing the explanation, just put the quotes in there. So if you've got a couple of minutes left, just put the quotes in and you don't need to explain it. And again, though, if it's a really obvious quote, you don't need to explain it anyway. Just move on to your next quote. Question 4 is very similar to question 2. It's another how question. It might just be slightly worded differently. So, for example, it might say thoughts and feelings. So in that case, you look for the extract and just find a few opinions about what someone says something about something. So this extract is about a man who breaks his leg climbing a mountain. That's Joe Simpson. And the question is, in this extract, Joe Simpson is involved in a tense and dramatic situation. How far do you agree? So you're basically just going to say you agree at the start and then five or six quotes to show that it is a tense and dramatic situation. Okay. It's basically the same as question 2, the how question. The only difference is you must agree with the question. It won't always be a question where it says, do you agree? It might say, what are the writer's thoughts and feelings about prisons, for example? And then you'd go through it and find 5 or 6 quotes that they say about prisons and say, he thinks it's awful with this quote, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so in this question, how far do you agree if it's tense? You would say, I agree it's tense, and then give me 5 or 6 quotes and explain them. So you can look for 1 or 2 word phrases. Again, it's going to be very rare that you copy out a couple of sentences as a quote. So just look for 1 or 2 word phrases. So the quote is, he broke his leg and it was a shattering blow in the knee. So I've zoomed in on shattering and I've put, I agree the writer makes it tense with the quote, shattering blow in the knee. This suggests Joe was blown to pieces. So I've put shattering blow in the knee there, but I could have just put shattering. So if you shatter, Joe's knee has got Beyonce's whacking this car window. That's what's happened to Joe. That's what a shatter is. So this student has received a mark for linking the word shattering to Joe's knee being blown to pieces. Another quote was, when he broke his leg, he screamed. Okay, so screamed, this suggests Joe was in agony from the pain in his knee. Again, the student get a mark because they've linked the word screamed to the guy being in enormous pain.